What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burtnett, bringing you a rundown of the Week 9 action. There wasn't too much that happened in Week 9, a lot of chalk held, few teams on bye weeks, but there were a couple of big games and big results that stood out that I will get to in a second before revealing my top 10 ahead of the first College Football Playoff rankings this coming Tuesday. But before I get started into that, if you go on to enjoy this video, please consider leaving a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on those post notifications so you're always up to date when I post the latest College Football Talk videos. But without further ado, let's get into it. The biggest game of the weekend, or at least the biggest result, was Kansas upsetting Oklahoma at home. And the Jayhawks, first of all, shout out Lance Leopold at head coach. He has completely turned around that Jayhawks program. You know, they made strides last year, I think, getting off to a 5-0 start or 4-0 start. And this year, they've continued the momentum. They have a couple of losses, but they have now a big win over Oklahoma. Huge win for Kansas. And really, the game was kind of back and forth. You know, Oklahoma had control in bits. Kansas had control in bits. And what it kind of came down to was a fourth down play right around midfield where Kansas starting quarterback Bean made a pass kind of over the middle on 4th and 6. They picked up a huge first down. I think picked up somewhere around 30, 40 yards, and Kansas went on to score a touchdown then, and they went up 38-33. Dillon Gabriel, who continues to be an incredible player and I believe is deserving of being in the conversation for the Heisman. I'm not sure quite if he would be a finalist, but I think he's definitely up there. He might be just outside those top 4 spots for who would be a finalist as of right now. Another big game for Dillon Gabriel. Had a chance late. Oklahoma has the ball, I think, inside the Kansas 30. Throws one up into the end zone. It gets batted away. And Kansas, as time expires, and Kansas comes away with a huge win. And what this really does is shakes up the Big 12 even more. The Big 12 has kind of been like this, really, the last few years, but it's become even more kind of what the Pac-12 has been, which is a little bit of cannibalization where teams just kind of beat up on each other and teams grab wins here and there. And I wouldn't call this a shock upset by any means. It's a big upset. It's definitely a good win for Kansas and deserving of the field storming and throwing the goalposts in a nearby lake near the Kansas stadium. But what it does for the Big 12 is it shakes up the picture even more. You know, you had Texas with the one loss to Oklahoma. And they've still had teams playing pretty close, and it certainly will be interesting to see if the Longhorns, as they come up in a big game against Kansas State this weekend, if they can keep their wins piling up. Because they haven't been winning too pretty recently, but they're still getting the job done. Malik Murphy stepped in for Quinn Ewers and had an okay game. I think he threw a couple of picks, had a little bit of those, first start jitters in there for sure, but did enough to help Texas to a win. And so this Big 12, you have 7 teams that have 1 or 2 losses in conference play. And among those teams with 1 losses are obviously Oklahoma and then Iowa State. Shout out the Cyclones. They have turned things around from kind of a slow start, a poor start, especially in non-conference play. And they've been playing really well in the Big 12. They picked up another win this week and are currently cruising right now. And they head into a big matchup against the Jayhawks in their next game. And so Kansas State and Texas, 2 of the other teams with 1 loss in the conference, they're both 4-1 in conference. Texas is 7-1 overall. Kansas State is 6-2. And then Bedlam, for at least on the schedule, the last time I have to check on that. At least for the last time is Big 12 opposition. I'm not sure if that series will be slated to continue as a non-conference thing. I'll have to double check that in post. But obviously a big game in Bedlam this year. Both teams are also both 4-1 in conference, 7-1 Sooners against the 6-2 Cowboys. And so this Big 10 West is wide open. Then you have some teams with 2 losses, including West Virginia, Kansas. But it is a wide open conference, and it'll be very exciting to watch how things shape up. I still think Oklahoma and Texas are probably the 2 teams that emerge from the conference, but we saw last year with Kansas State and TCU, teams can kind of come out of nowhere. And if you get, a team like an Iowa State, if they could stay hot, pick up some wins, they could find themselves in Arlington in place of one of the Sooners or Longhorns in their last year before moving to the SEC. But speaking of the SEC, Georgia was back to looking like the dominant dogs once again. They really handled Florida very easily after giving up an opening drive touchdown. They really just kind of took control of that game moving forward. And even without Brock Bowers, Carson Beck had a strong game. The Bulldogs overall on offense really just ground and kind of tore the Gators apart and pick up what I think is one of a couple of good wins this season. They have the win over Kentucky that was kind of dampened by Kentucky losing the next week to Missouri, but Missouri's a good team too, and I think Georgia's win this week was kind of a solidification of their status. If you've seen my last couple of videos, you know that I kind of had them a little bit lower in the rankings, and that was because they had some games where they didn't have things really all the way put together. But this past week, they really played a 60-minute football game, start to finish. Really, maybe you could say aside from that opening drive, but that's going to happen. You're going to give up touchdowns here and there, and I think they really responded to that opening drive with a strong performance. And so the Bulldogs are right back up there, I would say, in either the top 3 or top 2 teams. And then Oregon completely stomped Utah. Something about the Ducks playing these ranked opponents outside of Washington, they really bring what's needed to win the game. And obviously that Washington game, tough going into Seattle with all the hype that was going into that matchup, and really lost in about as close as it could be. So the Ducks kind of get back on track by beating a really good Utah team that obviously it's talked about a lot with the injuries at quarterback and kind of throughout the team, mostly at quarterback though, with Cam Rising out, and a good defense. The Ducks pretty much had their way. Bo Nix with another strong game. And so Oregon, I think, they're right there with Texas and Alabama for being the best one-loss teams. And as of right now, I would say they're probably right behind Alabama as the best one-loss team. And I think, actually, when I get into these rankings, I had an order going in before I started this video of what I would do, but I think I might shake that up a little bit, and we'll see with that as I get into that here. But final game to kind of go through, Ohio State had a tough test against a Wisconsin team that very, very solid defense, made things difficult at times. I think Kyle McCord, it's gotten to a point where he probably isn't quite to the level in terms of skill set to what both Justin Fields and CJ Stroud were, but I think he has that poise under pressure and he makes the plays, and he has somebody like Marvin Harrison Jr., the best wide receiver in America and a legitimate Heisman contender to turn to in those moments. And also, other guys as well, G. Scott, who had a good game after having kind of some, struggles to go through in terms of getting involved in the offense, and kind of stepped up in place of Cade Stover last night. And once again, it's not a world beater offense they were going against, but another really good performance by the Ohio State defense. And I think they prove once again by going into a tough environment, night game at Camp Randall, that they are among the top 3 teams in the nation as well. So let's get into that top 10. And another team that kind of fell out, it was kind of a top 12. They fell out with a loss, Oregon State at Arizona. Shout out the Wildcats. I think Jed Fish, their head coach, has turned around that program. They're 5-3, 1 win from bowl eligibility. So one more quick shout out there for the Wildcats. Number 1, they didn't play this past week. I'm not going to penalize them for that because in spite of their schedule, whatever you want to say about it, and in spite of the investigation going on, the Michigan Wolverines have looked like the best team in college football throughout the season, just in their ability to completely dominate pretty much every game that they've played in. I have Ohio State at 2, but I think it's really a 2A and a 2B. Right behind them, I have the Georgia Bulldogs. I think the Bulldogs kind of boosted their resume, but at the same time, Ohio State did as well by getting a good road win against Wisconsin. So both of those teams, you can't have 2 2s. I know it sometimes happens in the polls, but I'm one person, so I do have to make a decision there. I would put the Buckeyes just ahead of the Bulldogs. The Bulldogs, assuming they go through their back half of the schedule, 2 versus 3 doesn't make a big difference anyways, because when you're looking at the college football playoff, they play each other. It's not like it's a home game. At number 4, I have Florida State. They handled business at Wake Forest comfortably. I have Washington at 5, but honestly, because I have Oregon at 6, if it wasn't for that head-to-head, I would have Oregon ahead of Washington. I think because that head-to-head is still pretty recent, it's not like it was week 1. I think it still carries a good amount of weight, and I think it should at the end of the day. But Washington 5, Oregon at 6. Both of those two teams, Washington's, I think they have to be careful that they don't kind of ignore the opposition and kind of play down to the competition they have the last couple of weeks. They continue to win, though, so I'm not going to drop them far in the rankings. I think I dropped them maybe 1 spot. And so Washington at 5 and Oregon at 6. And then at 7, I have Texas. 8, I have Alabama. This is one where I'm very close. And I said I might change it, but I think I am going to keep it what it is. Because that head-to-head does still matter. And I think Texas, it was a good win in Tuscaloosa. And they pretty much handled the Tide there, at least in the last quarter, especially to get the W, come out of there with a win. And then number 9, I have Oklahoma. Ole Miss, I have 10. I think those two teams are pretty interchangeable. And then just outside this top 10 is another one-loss team, Missouri. The Tigers continue to pile up wins, and they have a tough slate coming up here when they go into Athens to face the Georgia Bulldogs. Another team that kind of got back on track this week is Louisville. North Carolina would have been right there, but the Tar Heels dropped another one to Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech has had a thing for beating number 17 teams, beating Miami a couple weeks ago, beating North Carolina this week. And the Yellow Jackets have put together a good season as well. They've made some significant strides forward and have had a couple of top 25 wins. So big season there in Atlanta. But those are my thoughts and my top, 11 or 12, whatever you want to call it, as we head into the first college football playoff rankings on Tuesday. So that's something to look forward to see what this field looks like from the one that it matters. I can give my opinion by the end of the day. It really doesn't matter too much. It's just kind of entertaining and fun to do. But if you stuck around to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. Have a great week. Peter Burnett, College Football Talk, signing out. Peace.